Hello and welcome. I'm Fiona and this is Case Continued. I'm gonna stop boring you with long drawn out introductions full of disclaimers. All that information is in the video description down below if you do want to check it out. You obviously don't have to, but we don't need all the rambling because we all know why we're here. So let's jump right into it. This episode, it's all about Nichol Kessinger.
Hi, it's me.
Shots fired.
Nichol Kessinger. Who is she? What role did she play in the events? And how has the public's perception of her evolved since the tragedy? Now, I'm going to keep this all really objective. I'm not here to tell you what to believe or what to think. I'm not trying to get you to think one way or another. We're all entitled to our own opinions, and I respect that. I'm not going to mock any of the theories out there either. What I'm going to do is look at both sides of the coin. There are plenty of reasons why people think Nichol had something to do with the crime. Some believe she was physically involved. Some people believe she planned everything. Some believe she had no knowledge of things prior, but that she was called in by Chris to help clean up when he freaked out. Some believe she knew more than she let on, and some people believe that she was lied to and manipulated, that this man ruined her life and it came completely out of left field. I'm going to examine this using all of the facts we have in the discovery, and we're also going to look at what Chris says and what Nichol says. I'm looking for evidence that Nichol was involved in some way, but I'm also going to be looking for alternative explanations for her behaviour and actions. I'm really going to be playing devil's advocate here, because that is the only fair and reasonable way to approach this. I don't want to influence your thoughts either way. This isn't about calling for Nichol to be arrested. This isn't about calling people Nichol apologists for looking at things critically and assessing things from all angles. It's about what we know happened from the evidence that we've been given and why there is such speculation tied to this element of the case. There are plenty of people in the world who are unlikable. Some people will find me unlikable, and that's absolutely fine because they're entitled to their opinion. But opinion isn't fact when dealing with true crime, and we have to stick with fact. The reason I want to explore alternative explanations for Nichol's actions isn't because I think she's a wonderful person. I don't know her, so I can never fully comment, and even if I did, it would still just be opinion. At the end of the day, my definition of a wonderful person could be much different to yours. But working with criminals taught me that you have to take emotion out of a case. You can't bring bias into a case. You could be talking to someone who has committed the most atrocious of crimes, but you still have to listen to their side of the story. Try and understand their opinions, their thought processes, and their actions, and ultimately try and find a way forward for these people. Criminals aren't necessarily likeable automatically because of the crimes they've committed. It's human nature to think like that. But when you work with criminals, you have to adjust that way of thinking. And that's what I'm going to be applying to Nichol Kessinger today, to really explore what is fact and what is fiction being expressed as fact. Now, we don't actually know very much about Nichol. There's certainly not very many facts about her published online, and she appears to have not had the kind of social media presence that Shanann Watts did, although any socials that she did have, I'm sure, were deleted when Shanann went missing at the latest. We do know that she was a 30-year-old woman living in Colorado. She'd earned a Bachelor of Science in Geology from Colorado State University in around 2013, with an associate degree from Community College of Aurora. She'd worked as a bookkeeper before transitioning to field engineering roles, most notably at Anadarko Petroleum via Tasman Geosciences. She met Chris Watts in June 2018 through their work at Anadarko Petroleum, and the relationship developed quickly, so by July, they were seeing each other romantically. Nichol has stated that she was unaware of Chris's marital status and that he led her to believe he was separated from his wife. She was reportedly shocked and confused when she learned about the murders, and when being questioned, she said she had no knowledge that Shanann was pregnant. According to the official narrative, she alerted authorities after Chris appeared disturbing the calm when telling her that his family had gone. Immediately after the disappearances, she gave multiple interviews to law enforcement and shared her communications with Watts. So we know Nichol was having an affair with Chris. We know she worked with Chris. We know that she lived in a North Glen apartment with a dog. We know she visited the Watts home on more than one occasion. We know that Chris and Nichol went out in public together. We know that she made some Google searches for Chris, Shanann, Ronnie, and the Watts home. We know that, at least at some point in the relationship, she knew she was Chris Watts' mistress. We know she has a bit of a selective memory. We know she likes crystals. We know she had a friend called Jim. We know she knew a lot about Chris and the financial situation in the Watts home for someone that had only been dating him for a short time. And that's it. And when everything was over, Nichol vanished. In October 2020, she took quite a bold step. She filed to legally change her name in Jefferson County in Colorado, and the court officially sealed her new identity. That filing is proof that she didn't just vanish, she planned her disappearance. And since then, no public appearances, bar being spotted at a funeral, no interviews, no new social media that we're aware of, just silence. Anonymity hard-earned and maybe warranted given everything that's happened. Following the murders, Nichol became the subject of intense media scrutiny. She was portrayed by some as the other woman who led Chris astray, but investigators concluded that she had no knowledge of his plans to murder his family and wasn't involved in the crime. Despite this, she's faced public backlash and has maintained that low profile since the events. So where do we even begin with Nichol? Because her story appears to have become bigger than Shanann's, Bella's, Cece's and Nico's. I respect anyone making factual content and simply adding an opinion. Opinions and debate are necessary in true crime, but there are some channels out there that, at this point, seem to be stating opinion as fact for financial gain, not for justice. We just seem to be taking things way too far now, and we've gone beyond making videos for educational purposes, and it's that I find a little bit strange, because there's something to be learned from every crime, from every criminal, from every victim. I'm certainly not bashing those who state opinion as opinion. I'm having a little nag about the channels that promote their thoughts as fact. Let's start at the beginning. When did Nichol Kessinger meet Chris Watts?
I'll let you just tell me your story. I think it's a little bit easier that way. So I just want to know how you met him, where you met him, how long you guys were dating, and those kind of things initially.
Okay. I think I met him sometime in June, probably early June. It might have been May. It was just talking at work. It was pretty casual.
Both Nichol and Chris tell police they met around June, not long after she'd started working at Anadarko. The first emails were exchanged on their work email accounts, and these are dated the 5th of June, right around the time the pair said they first met. The first email is from Nichol and includes other men from the Anadarko office relating to their gas monitors. Chris didn't hit reply all when he wrote back to her to thank her for her help. He sent this email to her alone. The next string of emails was a week later, on the 12th of June. Nichol wrote Chris a one-sentence email to thank him for being honest, as truthfulness is so underrated in our culture. I would love to know what conversation they'd had that inspired her to send him that email. Or to be a fly on the wall. Chris replied, "I'm a straightforward guy. Lying just complicates things," before going on to call her stunning and an amazing person. This email exchange got a little bit more heated and personal as the day went on, with Nichol admitting that she enjoyed talking to Chris and that he made her feel understood. But it does look a little bit here like she initially rebuffed his overtures for something romantic, as she said, "I am looking for someone to build a life with. So simple, but it is so unrealistic sometimes. Build something similar to what you have done with your wife and those cute little girls." She went on to say, "I do believe in karma, so out of respect for myself, you, and your family. I think it's best if we keep that friendship at work. Nichol then ended the email by confirming the mutual confidentiality of their communications. And in response, Chris stated that he also believed in karma and assured her that any conversations they had would stay between them. He then went on to give her his work phone number should she need to get hold of him out in the field. Now, there's people out there on YouTube that say that these emails were a red herring. They were purposely sent so that we believe that Chris and Nichol just started talking at that time, that they were covering the tracks and wanted everyone to think the relationship was just beginning at that point. Why would Chris and Nichol set up an email exchange to make us, the public, believe that they'd just started communication? Why would they be thinking about the public and what other people thought? The only thing that comes up in my head when I've heard somebody say that is that they're potentially thinking maybe the murders were being planned as far back as June, and that this was a plot by Chris and Nichol, who'd already discussed it and decided that they needed to throw everybody off the scent when the case broke. I'd really like to know your thoughts. While it does sound as though Nichol could be telling Chris that he needs to keep his distance in this email and that nothing can happen between them because she believes in karma, which could have been genuine, she could also have made this comment as a bit of a hook, almost like, if I say we should just be friends and he likes me, he'll chase me type deal. I find this email quite fascinating. She thanks Chris for his honesty. I do wonder if this is the point at which Chris has discussed his marriage and said he's not happy, potentially telling Nichol he'd like to be with someone like her. They've maybe been getting on really well, conversations maybe turned a bit more from flirting to a potential emotional attachment emerging, and Chris has had to come out and say, I'm actually married, but I'm not happy, so, everything will be fine because I'll get rid of my wife, I'll dump her, and we can be together. It's a tough one because we don't know anything about the context of their conversation prior to these emails, as we weren't actually there. But the email does suggest that they had been talking about relationships, as Nichol is making it quite clear in the email that she's looking for a proper relationship, someone she can build a life with, not just a fling or a short-term romance. It begs the question how flirtatious and deep their in-person conversations already were at that stage, but that's a question we'll never get answers to. A lot of people also don't believe that June is when Chris and Nichol started talking, because a co-worker claimed he saw them talking cosily as early as March or April. This is only one co-worker that we have on record saying this, and we obviously only have his word for it, just as we only have Chris and Nichol's. There's no actual proof of when they met and when they started talking. So if anybody says that they have it, they don't. It's false information. Let's take a look at what Chris says in his February 2019 prison interview in regards to when he actually met Nichol.
But talk a little bit more about Nicole. So walk me through it, because that was one of the things we never really got to ask about. So what happened there?
So it was probably around June 1st or something. That's when I first met her. And it was just like a work conversation that she messed with the gas meters that, we're out in the field. And then I was messing up, and then I took it to her like, hey, what's going on with this? Like, how do I fix it? And, after that, we just ran into each other a few times in the office. And I think it was probably the fourth time meeting. She had asked me, because like when we were talking back and forth, I would say, like we moved here from Colorado or from North Carolina and stuff like that. And then she's like, what's all this weed stuff? Took out my phone, showed her
And is that where you met
like,
Chris?
my girl's on the phone. It's like, oh, okay. Like, so, like, I didn't wear a ring at work because like I something else to get refitted after I lost all that weight. So, but
You lost so much weight that your fingers lost weight?
yeah, it was literally like I was out in the snow one time. I went like that, ring went off on the rocks. So I was panicking, trying to find out that I can't Chris anymore. But so after that, she left me alone for a couple of days, and she texted me outside the field. And then after that, we just kept texting back and forth, and it was just it's like like she used to work in a little rig out in North Dakota, I think, and we just kind of sharing the stories back and forth about what we did and everything. And then one day, it just kind of went to a different level, and then I never thought it would ever go to that level, but she was talking about meeting up after we got back from San Diego. Yeah, San Diego from the 22nd to the 26th of June, and we met up after we got back, and
How did you guys meet up?
at a park in Thornton. Yeah, Thornton somewhere. And after that, we just kept seeing each other pretty much the whole month of July.
So we can see from Chris's interview with detectives that he's actually quite specific about meeting Nichol and when. He gives the date of around about the 1st of June, whereas Nichol is kind of saying it's June, it could have been May, but she thinks it was June. Chris tells us that after about the 4th time of them talking, she started asking him, when he was talking about his life, who's this we? And that's when he had showed her pictures of the girls on his phone. Nichol tells us that that was right around Father's Day. So we do have similar stories coming from both of them.
So can you just take us through kind of a little bit of the early part of how he courted you or you courted him? I don't know which one happened. How you guys got to know each other?
I guess we just started talking. He actually, so part of my job is to manage the gas monitors that we have. So Anadarko requires all of their field personnel to carry gas monitor sensors for toxic gases, and it's my job to control the inventory, any issues, anything like that. And we were having some pretty serious equipment issues, and we had numerous amounts of people coming in my office one day, and he happened to be one of them. And I'd seen him before, they meet in the lunchroom, and that's where I go put my lunch in the fridge. So I'd seen him, but I didn't ever talk to him. So that day we just started talking, and then every time I saw him in the hallway after that, and it was always hit or miss, it wasn't an everyday thing. It was just when I saw him, we just started talking, and we just kind of had a lot in common and just hit it off. So we'd always have, pretty good conversations. And then, I don't know, one day he told me that he had kids and started talking about his kids, and then mentioned, yes, that I have a wife, but we're getting separated. I said, okay. And then,
When do you think that was?
when he said all that,
So specifically when he told you he was getting separated from his wife, was that within the first couple of weeks that you knew him, or was that later on? You said you met him around May or June.
yeah, it was still in June.
Okay.
It would have been before Father's Day.
The issue is, Chris tells investigators that after bumping into each other a few times and starting to talk, she had texted him outside of the field. And then they'd started this text message exchange. Now, if we just go back to those emails that we looked at before, Chris gives her his mobile number in case she needs to get hold of him. She's clearly taken him up on that offer. It looks in the emails as though Chris is kind of chasing Nichol by saying, she's this stunning and amazing person. But the person who actually initiates the contact outside of the workplace is Nichol. And that is definitely not the impression that she gives when she's being interviewed.
Why did he tell you that he was getting a divorce? Did he ask you out at that time?
No, he didn't. I think he was probably interested in me. And so he talked to me a couple times via his work phone, and I was like, no. It was still very friendly conversation.
She makes it sound as though Chris is so much more into her than she's into him, and he was the one who did all of the chasing. And this is where things start breaking down, because although both of them do say some quite similar things which would suggest that there is an element of truth being told by both of them in regards to certain aspects of their relationship, they also start completely derailing. And we end up with Nichol painting one picture and Chris painting a completely different one. The biggest thing that people jump on is that, as listed in the discovery, police found Nichol had Googled Chris Watts as early as the 3rd of August 2017. At first, it was reported to be a typo. Then DA Rourke stated it was not a typo and had genuinely been found on Nichol's phone, with him saying nobody had any idea why it was there. This opened up a whole can of worms, which resulted in people saying that Nichol had been stalking the couple for ages and was purposely trying to snatch Chris away for herself, that she'd been constantly looking them up on Facebook and had this plan to steal Chris. Some say that Chris met Nichol at the gym around this time and that's why she Googled him in 2017. Some say that Nichol met Shanann and or Chris at a hospital function at the hospital Shanann had been working at, that she took a shine to Chris and began stalking him, purposely getting employment and a dark horse so she could lure him into her web. We've really got to be honest about this. We don't know any of that, and there is absolutely no proof in the discovery or any interviews to support a single word of it. There is no evidence that Nichol met Chris at a gym. There is no evidence that Chris or Shanann met Nichol at any hospital function. One of the issues with Nichol's phone records is that people could potentially be misunderstanding what DA Rourke is actually saying when he states he doesn't know how or why Nichol's Google search for Chris and later Shanann is there. This could maybe be him actually saying not that he doesn't know why Nichol would have done this, but rather he doesn't know how it even ended up in the records. We have to remember that Nichol consented to a search of her phone. The actual search warrant has a date range of 1st of June to 15th of August of 2018, the period that she claimed to have met Chris up until after the murders. This was the only date range that law enforcement required to build up evidence in the case. Detective Prill actually had no legal authority to check any of Nichol's search history before 2018. It's a distinct possibility that the report of a typo was made because they had to account for why a date out of the legally requested time frame was listed in the evidence documents. People say, I don't know how searching the name Chris Watts or Shanann Watts could be a typo because Nichol's had to physically type their names into Google. But it was about the date. They were trying to state that the date was a typo, an error on their part, because they had to say something about this report. And then in the end, when Chris was sentenced, this date discrepancy didn't matter at all. And DA Rourke most likely figured that he'd get out of being asked more and more questions about it if he just stated that the information was indeed correct, but he didn't know how it got there. At the end of the day, if Detective Prill had been analysing data on Nichol's phone much further back than the legally requested dates, then both the cover letter to the phone data report was wrong and the search warrant would have been illegal because the warrant only covered June to August. Now, this is a concept that's largely ignored in favour of Nichol being a Facebook stalker. We have to note that the searches she made for both Shanann and Chris were Google searches. We have no idea what sites she actually looked at as a result of the searches. So for the people saying that she was constantly going through their Facebook accounts on a daily basis, there's just no evidence to support this. We can say that Shanann's Facebook was open and not set to private because of the nature of her employment, selling Thrive, so it didn't matter that Nichol didn't have a Facebook account until we're blue in the face, because that's not proof that Nichol was constantly stalking anybody. Do we know if Chris's Facebook was open or set to private? No, we can only make assumptions because Shanann attempted to sell Thrive on his behalf. So again, we have no proof that Nichol was visiting anyone's Facebook accounts daily or weekly, let alone stalking them. And let's just recap the definition of stalking, because it's a very serious term. Googling someone isn't stalking. But if it becomes repetitive and obsessive, it can quickly unravel and become illegal. We only have evidence of Nichol searching for Chris and Shanann on a couple of occasions prior to the crimes. There's a distinct difference between searching someone's name online and stalking. Stalking differs because unwanted attention occurs repeatedly. It causes fear. It puts a person's safety at risk. It's dangerous and it requires protection, often involving the police. If Nichol had genuinely been stalking Chris or Shanann, we would really expect to see a lot more evidence of searches for them in those phone records, considering that there was some kind of issue where they have found information going back to 2017. It's possible that there were multiple other searches made between August 2017 and June 2018 when they claim they first met, and that information, for whatever reason, just hasn't been recoverable. The issue with using the term stalking is when we're discussing true crime, we do need to stick to the legal definition of it. And stalking has become one of those words that we throw around quite a lot. You know, you say to your friends, oh, I was stalking your Facebook last night. I was stalking your Instagram. And in throwaway conversation, a lot of people use it. But when talking about true crime cases, we do have to remember that stalking is an absolutely horrendous crime and the victims suffer terribly. Now, that's not to say that Nichol wasn't a stalker, we just might not know about it. But when I'm discussing Nichol, I won't refer to her in any of these videos as stalking Chris and Shanann whenever she's looked them up. Like I said, I'm playing devil's advocate here. So I'm going to be, in these videos, looking at everything that's kind of wrong with Nichol, the things she said and the things that she has done or the way that she's come across. And I am going to be looking for alternative explanations as to her behaviour. The question does remain, why did she search for Chris Watts in August 2017? Where did she know him from? She'd clearly crossed paths with him either in person or online at some point. Otherwise, she wouldn't have known his name to be able to Google it. I don't have the answer to that question, and I'm not going to pretend that I do. I'm not going to speculate on where exactly she might have met him because I don't know, but she had knowledge of his name to make that Google search. If she Googles Chris, if she does access Facebook, she'll see he's married to Shanann. She could potentially just have been checking out Shanann because she was Chris's wife. If she liked Chris, liked the look of Chris, she probably wanted to check out a competition, look for flaws or things that she could use to her advantage to make sure that Chris chose her. Lots of women do the same. It's not uncommon. It is something that happens. You know, D.A. Rock stated that this date, 2017, wasn't a typo. But in saying that, potentially thinking that people would stop questioning him about it, being out of the legally requested time frame, it's just raised more questions and speculation because we have an unanswered question that is massive in this case, and nobody knows the answer to it. For those channels out there that have definitive proof that Nichol and Chris met at a gym or they met at the hospital, there is no proof, there is no evidence. But we don't know that Chris wasn't actually at a gym and didn't meet her there. Let's not forget that Shanann bought Chris workout equipment for the basement so he didn't have to go to the gym. That could mean that he was already going to the gym. Gym memberships are expensive. Maybe Shanann was half thinking about that. She also said that she wanted to spend time with him and the girls, and so in an evening she didn't really want him going out to the gym. She'd rather he was at home. So maybe there is some truth to this speculation. It could very well be likely that Chris did meet Nichol at a gym and she took a shine to him. And then it could be complete coincidence that their paths crossed when she started working at Anadarko. But we'll get more into that as we go on. There is also the option that Nichol maybe came across Shanann at some point because Shanann was a big online presence with her Facebook selling those Thrive products. She was well known in the area for it. And if Nichol was into fitness and supplements and healthy eating and healthy living, Thrive might have been something that she stumbled across and then discovers this promoter called Shanann is maybe the nearest promoter to her. If that's the case, she could have easily accessed Shanann's Facebook and saw she was married to Chris and taken a liking to this man. Now, we can't confirm any of that because we don't know any more information prior to the first search that was made for Chris Watts on the 3rd of August 2017. I'm sure we would all love to know what other things she was searching for at that point, because that could answer a few questions. We might see that there was a search made for Thrive or other searches made for healthy living services. if you will, in her area. And that could explain exactly how she came across Shanann, and it would stop a lot of people speculating, myself included. But we just don't have that information. So we can't definitely say that that's how they met. And that is a problem, you know, because I've read some forums and there's some horrendous ones out there that discuss this particular case. And we'll cover those and the dangers of them in a later video. But I have seen people saying, you know, well, it was proved that Nichol met Chris in the gym near her house in 2017 and they started seeing each other then. That's been proved. It hasn't been proved. It's speculation. We're all speculating. Regardless, based on the evidence presented in the discovery and the fact that we can clearly see that Nichol only made a couple of searches prior to her affair with Chris, we can't label Nichol Kessinger a stalker. Let's move on to Nichol wiping a phone of anything to do with Chris and telling both Chris and her friend, Charlotte Nelson, to do the same thing. Nichol admitted to law enforcement that once the story broke about Shanann and the girls being missing, she went through her phone and deleted all communications with Chris. Texts, call logs, photos. She claimed it was because she was embarrassed and grossed out by him and didn't want to be part of it once she found out that Chris had lied about being separated and that Shanann was pregnant.
About, and it made me realize that maybe his wife was in danger at that point, and it was day two too, and she still wasn't home.
What did that cause you to do with your phone, though?
Oh, what? When I deleted those? I was just kind of grossed out by him, to be honest with you. I was just like, I don't know what's going on right now, but you just lied to me, and I don't want to see this come over my phone anymore. So I removed it.
So you already said, but you removed text messages.
I deleted all of his stuff because he lied to me. I mean, that's what it was. It was the hurt that made me delete it, and then it was the lie that made me start questioning everything else he'd been telling me for the last few days.
And that's when you decided to come forward.
Yes.
Okay. So just for context,
Yes.
when people delete stuff off phones, usually we go, hold on a second.
No. It
And
wasn't
that's why I
malicious
wanted,
at
right.
all. It
No, I'm
wasn't
not saying it's
malicious at
malicious,
all. He lied to me. It just hurt. Like, I had never felt like he'd ever lied to me before. And it was a big lie. I mean,
Right.
telling somebody that you're in the midst of a divorce and then you have a wife that has a 15-week-old baby on the way is a huge, huge thing. And I was very taken back.
She also informed law enforcement that she told her friend, Charlotte Nelson, to delete any text messages between them that referenced Chris. She framed this as an attempt to prevent a private life from being dragged into a high-profile case. We're told that she'd previously asked Chris to delete any messages and data on his end as well, supposedly, again, to maintain privacy. From an investigative and public point of view, these actions can be interpreted as a consciousness of guilt. Even if she wasn't involved in the murders, deliberately scrubbing digital evidence can appear like an attempt to hide something, especially if it happens after she knows the family is missing. It causes obstruction of justice concerns. Law enforcement had to work that bit harder to reconstruct timelines and communications because critical data had been deleted. And while it's not illegal in itself, unless the deletion is done after being told not to, it is frowned upon in active investigations.
The girlfriend you referenced in court, can you give us a better idea of her role in the investigation, how forthcoming she was and how she helped?
She originally came forward and spoke to investigators on her own volition. Prior to the time, unfortunately, that she came in and spoke with investigators, she had deleted all of the information off of her phone that had any connection between her and Chris Watts. That hampered the investigation. That hampered our ability to get that electronic digital connection between the two. She was interviewed on multiple occasions. I believe that for the most part, she was forthcoming in the course of those investigations. We don't have any reason to believe that she had any prior knowledge or involvement in the death of Shanann, Bella, Celeste, and Nico. I think that's the best way I can answer that.
The timing really matters as well because Nichol deleted everything after learning Shanann and the girls were missing, but before Chris was arrested. So that makes it look less like simple embarrassment and more like panic or fear of implication. And of course, telling other people to delete things compounds suspicion. Encouraging a friend to delete messages, particularly when it involves a man now under national scrutiny, further deepens the impression that she's trying to erase her tracks. Nichol told investigators that she was shocked and felt betrayed by Chris. She thought that Shanann and Chris were separated and she didn't know Shanann was pregnant. And once she realised she'd been lied to, she panicked, didn't want to be associated with him publicly, and she was feeling hurt and didn't want to see any of his stuff coming up on her phone. She also voluntarily spoke to the police for hours, handed over a phone, albeit after scrubbing it, and allowed her search history to be reviewed, and she wasn't charged with anything. So we need to kind of look at the public perception versus legal reality. And yes, there are some differences between UK and US laws, but there is also an overlap where it comes down to some things just being basic rights. Legally, Nichol Kessinger, in deleting her text messages, did not commit a crime. She was cooperative and found not to be complicit in the murders. But publicly, many people believe her actions, especially that deleting of evidence and encouraging others to do so, indicate that she knew more, it was more entangled than she claimed. While it's not illegal or even necessarily immoral if you take emotion out of it, those choices appeared evasive and they've led many to question her honesty and her motives and potential prior knowledge. But there are some psychological and practical reasons that might explain Nichol's actions. And the first one is panic and self-preservation, because Nichol realised that she was now intimately connected to someone whose family had initially gone missing, someone who was a suspect, and eventually somebody who was accused of murdering his pregnant wife and 2 daughters. Deleting texts and distancing herself would be a natural fight or flight reaction. Especially in today's media landscape, being associated with a killer, even unwittingly, can really destroy your reputation and your safety. There's the fear of public backlash. Nichol wasn't just trying to stay out of legal trouble, she was probably terrified of public judgment, online harassment, or worse. You know, people in similar cases have been doxxed, stalked, threatened. Erasing messages could feel like protecting herself from the court of public opinion. And she might have thought to herself that she had every right to delete those text messages because they were nothing to do with anybody else. They were personal. Because people often wrongly assume that unless they've committed the crime, they don't owe the police their private information. Nichol might have just thought that a personal text had absolutely nothing to do with the case if murder wasn't being discussed. Or she might have felt that the messages would have been misunderstood and gone into panic mode. It's also possible that somebody, like a lawyer or a friend, told her, clean up your phone. You do not want your personal life dragged into this. People often say, if somebody is innocent and the police want to talk to them about a crime, but they have nothing to do with that crime, why would they lawyer up at all if they know they're not guilty? You hear that so often. Lawyering up is not an indication of guilt all the time. And honestly, I am a massive advocate of anybody who is potentially going to be questioned for anything to get legal representation within the first 30 seconds. That's not because I don't trust the police, but in this day and age, it is just common sense that you would protect yourself in any kind of police interview. You could easily say something as an innocent person. All it takes is for you to say one thing that sounds slightly concerning to a police officer, and you could find yourself in a lot of trouble. So it's not an indication of guilt that somebody might seek advice from a lawyer as soon as they realise that they could be potentially implicated in a crime. It's just sensible. While deleting these messages isn't obstruction of justice, unless it's done with the intent to hide evidence, it certainly does affect perception. The people that are calling for her to be investigated based on her deleting text messages They have to understand that any prosecutor would have a very, very hard time trying to prove that she deleted text messages with the intention of destroying evidence. This would need to be proved beyond a reasonable doubt. She wasn't legally named as a suspect. This isn't me saying that you can't hold this opinion. You absolutely can, and I respect that. It's simply me saying that in this situation, while Nichol was not a suspect, saying deleting the messages is obstruction of justice, she needs to go to prison, the law simply isn't on your side. As much as some people would have loved for her to be a suspect from the very beginning, she wasn't. Whether that's right or not is down to you. I'm not going to tell you either way. You can all think for yourselves. And as I said, I respect your opinions. None of this, with Nichol deleting things, is really unheard of though. And to be honest, a lot of people in Nichol Kessinger's shoes would also be looking to rapidly distance themselves from someone like Chris when they learn his whole family have gone missing, and he's seemingly not that interested. He's more interested in where your relationship's going. While it does, of course, make Nichol look like she may have been trying to cover something up, we have absolutely no evidence, no proof that she was. It's quite a strange thing that she tried to destroy a SIM card before giving a phone to police, right? But that's another example of misinformation spreading like wildfire and a narrative that's constantly being pushed because she didn't try and destroy her SIM card. And we're shown that in the text messages between her and Agent Kobach. What she does say is she has got access to her old phone, but the SIM card is broken. Investigators had already got information off Nichol's phone, so what would be the point in purposely destroying your SIM card after the police have already had access to your phone? It is misinformation, it's not fact, and the fact is included for us all to see in the text messages between Nichol and Agent Kobach. It wasn't her current phone that the SIM was broken on, it was her old phone. It makes a hell of a good story, another way to prove that she was destroying evidence, but it's just not correct. Of course, Nichol had made Google searches to find out whether the police could retrieve deleted text messages. And yeah, it looks suspicious. But there is also the opinion that Nichol was embarrassed about the content of the messages that her and Chris had been sending each other. She had, after all, sent him a whole host of semi-nude and nude photos of herself. And if police searched her phone, all of these would be visible to them. We don't know exactly what these pictures contained, but they were all clearly erotic-y type images that are for private exchanges only. How many times do things get leaked by the police or accidentally end up in the media? She could potentially have worried that some of her images might get out to the public. She might not have liked the thought of police officers looking at pictures of her naked. She was probably really freaking out. A lot of women would be, and while we can all say we would have been more concerned about a murder investigation than our own embarrassment, at the time she was deleting content, if you go by the official narrative in Nichol's story, which is the only one we have evidence of, the discovery, she didn't know it was a murder investigation. The family were just not home. So she had every right to feel embarrassed at that stage. A later search being done to find out if police can retrieve deleted messages could just lean into that worry that her pictures would be viewable, and if she'd read online that police could see this content, that might be why she was so reluctant to hand the phone over. It's not necessarily because she was implicit in the actual murders. Something else people say makes Nichol suspicious is that she had her dad, Nichol Kessinger, with her in an interview because he was either friendly with the DA, has ties to law enforcement, bribed everyone, was a Freemason, or was a warlock. Dwayne has no evidenced ties to the DA, to law enforcement, or to the Freemasons. The warlock I'm not getting into just yet. While I certainly can't speculate about his net worth, he owned an electrical contracting company. Just a regular Joe. Nobody with any evidenced influence, and nobody with any evidenced bank balance that would pay off a DA to make sure that his daughter wasn't investigated of a crime as big as a homicide. But there are several key comments from Dwayne that many people have found troubling. Don't lead.
If, let's say this week you guys were to go look at some apartments, and this is hypothetical, but you've never found out that his wife was pregnant, would that have changed anything? Like you just said, if I knew his wife was pregnant, I wouldn't be in this picture. So if his wife was not pregnant, and forgive me, but if he takes her out of the picture, you're never going to know that she was pregnant, right?
What do you mean takes her out of the picture?
If he murdered her, she's out of the picture. You're never going to know if she was pregnant. If he can get away with murder, you're not going to. I got divorced from my wife. You say, do you understand what I'm saying here? If she's gone,
but this
Don't lead,
hypothetically,
please.
Yeah.
Don't lead on.
hypothetically, if she,
Okay.
you understand where I'm going. If
Right,
you
but
didn't know,
You're leading into questions that are nothing with your.
if you didn't know though
Wait, Nick,
that she was there,
did you hear what I said?
I'm following you. I just want her to answer a question that relates to. She said something that's important.
Now, this came quite early in the interview. It sounds like he's telling the investigator what he could and couldn't do. He emphasises that Nichol doesn't have to comply with handing a phone over, but she should, because it will prove that she's been telling the truth, which kind of suggests a defensive or strategic mindset.
Just a thing on the courtesy for the phone for, what was that guy's name? Don?
This gentleman,
oh,
Thornton PD. I just met him today. Do you want to do the
I
phone?
forgot about that.
For TPD?
It's not for them. They're doing it for us.
Yes.
We don't have the equipment with us to do it. And I asked them to do it for us. They're not involved in this investigation. He would just be a computer person. He would not be looking at any of this stuff. That would fall to myself. So keep that in mind. He's not involved in this investigation. Thornton PD has nothing to do with this other than letting us use their facility and helping us with some electronic download. He's not going to look at your phone right now. He's going to put it on a disc and they're going to give it to me.
Gotcha. I don't know. What do you think? I really want to help you guys. I do. I feel like I'm. This whole thing is just gonna be crazy, regardless of whether I give you my phone or not. I mean, that's kind of how I look at it. Like it's happening. It's gonna happen.
Well, the text
Media is
reiterate
just
what you've been saying all along, so it's not like.
Well, they do. That's the other thing too. I mean, that's kind of a good backup. Yeah, I'll give
I
it
think
to 'em.
you hit the nail right on the head. There's reasons why we want everything. It validates things that we know.
And while he was technically true, Nichol didn't have to hand a phone over. It does draw attention to his protective stance. He does appear at one point to pressure the investigators to move quickly before memory fades or public attention builds, possibly revealing things that they'd rather stayed private. He asks if Chris pleads guilty, does everything stop? And this implies they're thinking about the legal fallout and hoping that plea deal might clear Nichol's name, which again seems legally cautious. He mentions about pounding down the discovery, and I think this is the one that raised the most eyebrows. It sounds like he's referring to strategically managing or minimising exposure through the discovery process. A very defence attorney style statement. And a lot of people ask, why was he allowed there and why was he allowed to stay? Well, Nichol wasn't in custody and she wasn't a suspect. And that's the key legal threshold because Nichol wasn't under arrest. She wasn't being interrogated as a suspect. She was voluntarily participating, unless that person was actively disrupting the process. And that's where it gets tricky. Because people say that Dwayne was, but he wasn't actually technically obstructing. While his comments were rude in parts and possibly a bit strategic, he did not instruct Nichol to lie. He didn't prevent her from speaking, and he didn't cause the interview to end prematurely. So while his tone was protective, sceptical, and downright bossy in parts, it didn't meet the threshold for interference in a legal or procedural sense. Had he actively, continually interrupted questioning, refused to let Nichol speak, or tried to answer for her all the time, detectives could have, and likely would have, asked him to step out. But Dwayne actually hovered in that grey area. Protective, not disruptive, not in a legal sense. The lead detectives were also walking quite a fine line here. If they had kicked Dwayne Kessinger out of the interview, Nichol might have shut down or stopped cooperating entirely. Letting Dwayne stay helped to keep Nichol calm, and it maintained her willingness to eventually hand over a phone and talk for hours, and it avoided triggering a lawyering up moment. So it could be that this was a strategic decision by law enforcement, possibly very frustrating to some of us, but arguably effective because it kept Nichol on side. And keeping Nichol on side means she keeps cooperating. Dwayne likely realised early on that his daughter's name was going to be dragged through a media and legal firestorm. Initially, when Shanann and the girls are missing, and we're kind of starting to see how Chris is conducting himself in his media interviews, he's obviously under suspicion, and there's every chance this could end up as a murder case. So he probably felt the need to protect a reputation and to preempt legal exposure. And he'd potentially consulted with a lawyer or been coached on how to manage police interactions. So his mindset could be less about obstruction and more about damage control for a daughter who could have gotten involved with someone dangerous who lied to her. Yes, Dwayne's behaviour was unusually involved to a certain extent, and his comments were protective and sometimes borderline inappropriate, really, for a police interview. But Nichol wasn't a suspect. He didn't cross the legal threshold for obstruction, and the police made a judgment call to keep her talking rather than confront the interference. So it comes down to this. What he did may have felt like interference or obstruction, but it was legally allowed, and it was probably more effective at keeping Nichol engaged than kicking him out would have been. Now, if Nichol were a suspect, things would have been a lot different. If the detectives believed that Nichol might have helped Chris hide the crime or known about the murders beforehand, or if they felt that she was lying during interviews in a criminally significant way, then she'd be considered a person of interest or a suspect. And she'd have to be read her Miranda rights, informed that anything she said could be used against her in court, and given the right to have an attorney present. If she was under interrogation as a suspect, only a licensed attorney would be permitted to stay because she was an adult. Dwayne's interventions, like telling the detective not to lead, questioning the police strategy, and hinting at how the discovery would be handled, would not be tolerated in a suspect interview. If he had somehow managed to get in the first place, he'd definitely have been asked to leave. If the police had ever considered Nichol a suspect, her admission, because she did admit it, she told law enforcement, her admission that she deleted all communications with Chris and asked a friend Charlotte to delete texts and asked Chris to remove things, could be reframed as a potential obstruction of justice. Even if she didn't know about the murders beforehand, law enforcement might interpret those actions as attempting to conceal relevant evidence. And she wasn't a suspect, so none of this applies. There is no obstruction of justice. She wasn't told not to make any modifications to her phone. And because they had no other evidence to suggest that she was implicated anyway in the murders, there's absolutely no case for obstruction of justice for anything that she deleted prior to speaking to investigators. But a lot of people want to know why she wasn't treated as a suspect. And it's just as simple as the police and the prosecutors didn't have evidence that Nichol knew about the murders in advance, that she helped Chris cover them up, or that she lied about anything material to the crime. Everything she deleted was seemingly related to her relationship, not the murder itself. She also voluntarily contacted the police. Yes, we know they already knew about her, but still. Provided phone data, even if it was scrubbed. She never contradicted any hard evidence, and she didn't attempt to hide or disappear as soon as Chris's family went missing. But we all want to know why Nichol Kessinger wasn't considered a suspect as soon as law enforcement found out Chris was having an affair with her. Well, the early focus was on Chris Watts, rightly so. From the beginning, Chris's behaviour raised red flags because he was unemotional and flat in interviews. He failed the polygraph test almost immediately, and investigators noticed signs of deception and concealment in his answers. So because of this, law enforcement zeroed in on Chris very early, and he quickly became their prime, and ultimately sole, suspect. Nichol contacted police voluntarily. We are going to get into that because we know the police already knew about her. She gave multiple interviews. She handed over a phone eventually. She gave them access to her search history, texts and call logs. And that level of cooperation made her seem like a witness rather than a co-conspirator. There was no forensic evidence like surveillance footage linking her to the crime scene or the disposal site. Investigators had no tangible proof whatsoever that she was involved in the planning or execution of the murders. The timeline didn't place her near the scene. The cell phone data placed Nichol away from the Watts home during the murders. We'll discuss the 6:15 a.m. ping in a short while, but investigators confirmed her location and determined that she wasn't present when the killings occurred. When Chris confessed, he never implicated Nichol. In fact, he claimed she had no knowledge of the murders. In his later confession to the FBI in 2019 from prison, he said that he'd lied to her repeatedly and she had no clue what he was planning. But yes, Chris Watts does tell lies. The affair motive didn't automatically implicate Nichol. While the affair was clearly a motive for Chris, it didn't mean Nichol was in on it. It's not uncommon for someone committing familicide to eliminate their family to pursue a new life or relationship without the new partner being involved or even aware of their intentions. But lots of people still aren't happy because Nichol was given nearly 2 weeks from August the 15th to August the 28th to hand over a phone to law enforcement after first speaking with investigators. Many people saw this as highly unusual, especially in a high-profile murder case where digital evidence could be crucial. So why would law enforcement allow that kind of delay? Well, again, she wasn't a suspect. And by the time Nichol came forward, Chris was already being investigated. They were already searching his home, processing the crime scene, preparing to interview Chris and people who knew him. They likely believed Nichol wasn't involved in the actual crime at all and that Chris was the one to focus on urgently. So rather than press her hard early on, they gave her space to remain cooperative while they closed in on the killer. Legally, the investigator wasn't doing a bad job or being duped. He was following process and making the decision to keep a witness, the one with undoubtedly the most information about Chris at that point in time, talking and compliant. It's a strategy that's used a lot. Another thing that pops up is the claim that Nichol didn't voluntarily contact police. She only did so because she'd been tipped off that they already knew about it. So in the early morning of August 15th around 8 a.m, a regional manager at Anadarko informed the CBI, Agent Tammy Lee, that an internal investigation had uncovered emails revealing an affair between Chris and a co-worker, beginning around June. And roughly 2 hours later, at about 9:50 a.m, Nichol contacted authorities herself, calling the police and claiming she wanted to share what she knew about Chris. Now, this does suggest a strong likelihood that she was tipped off, not spontaneously coming forward out of pure altruism. But is this really a problem? It doesn't prove that she had anything to do with the crime. Realistically, Nichol did probably learn via a workplace colleague or friend that Anadarko had flagged the affair to investigators, prompting her to act quite swiftly. Her decision to erase her phone data and to contact investigators might have been an attempt to control the narrative, to appear proactive rather than reactive. Some have questioned whether a sudden involvement was more about self-preservation than helping the case, since the internal notification would have made her a point of interest anyway. Of course, she'd want to try and maintain her own reputation and image in all of this. Why does this damage control make her guilty? Any thoughts? Pop them in the comments. Plenty of people would behave the same way, but if we've never been in the exact same situation that Nichol was, then we actually can't speculate about what we would do ourselves, because we just don't know. On the 14th of August, the day after Shanann, Bella and Celeste went missing, the Discovery file shows us that Nichol spent hours searching the internet for information on Chris Watts and news accounts of Shanann's disappearance. She then deleted the search history. These searches were conducted frequently by Nichol over the next several days. She deleted every one afterwards. Theories abound that point to this specifically making her implicit in the murders. They say that if she genuinely didn't know anything about the disappearance of the family, why would she be Googling for information, and why so frequently? Why would she delete her searches? Why would she be looking for information relating to Shanann and the girls before going to the police? First of all, and remember, I'm playing devil's advocate all the way through this, Nichol had been dating this man. He told her he was finally moving out and that he was wanting to look at apartments with Nichol, and they'd been discussing this together. But then suddenly, his wife and kids vanish. Anyone in Nichol's position would be concerned, even suspicious. So she Googled Shanann. She Googled Chris. That doesn't necessarily mean she was hiding something. She could have just been trying to figure out the truth. And let's be honest, most people would do the exact same thing. Second, deleting phone searches isn't that unusual either, especially if you suddenly realised that the man you'd been seeing might be involved in something horrible. Maybe she panicked. Maybe she was scared of how it would look. Deleting a search isn't a crime. It could have just been embarrassment, shame, shock. If she had heard that this affair had been outed and had been reported to detectives, she could have run. She could have refused to cooperate. But she didn't run. She didn't refuse to talk. What do you guys think? If she had something to hide, would she have stayed quiet? Or do you think she was faking cooperation to try and take the heat off her and her involvement? It's important to remember, regardless of whether she knew Chris was actively separating from Shanann or not, she was lied to by Chris as well. He was leading a double life. If anything, she might have felt tricked, scared and betrayed, just like everyone else. A lot of Nichol's actions were questionable, or at least have become questionable in hindsight, as channels have continued to discuss her involvement and look for the smallest of details that could possibly link her to being an accessory. But to be really objective, some of Nichol's actions could be seen as the messy, imperfect reactions of somebody who just suddenly realised that she was involved with a monster. And at the end of the day, it's possible Nichol was just someone who made a terrible mistake in trusting the wrong person and then tried to backpedal once she realised who he really was. And maybe, just maybe, that's all there is to it. Let's talk a biggie. The 111-minute phone call. This is quite incredible, really, because in her interviews, Nichol remembers an awful lot of minor detail. There are points in the interview at which she just simply goes off on a tangent and waffles.
And I just feel like some of this happened so long ago that I can't tell you like the exact words of the exact conversation at the exact time and place, because it's like we had a lot of conversations. I mean, we talked every single day, so it's
if there's
like I'm trying to help you guys with the stuff that's more current. I can give you guys a lot more like detail and exact times, but when you're asking me about something that happened 6 weeks ago and exactly what was said, it's like, I mean, I'm sure I can give you a general idea, but to be honest with you, like to pinpoint exact words, it's not going to happen. I am very calm when I talk to people. It's like extremely rational when I handle situations that there's a disagreement in. And not that I didn't want to ever, it was just not now. It's like you're not finalized with your separation, and not only that, we've barely been dating. Like, you can't introduce kids to somebody new in a situation like that. That's something that takes time. I mean, would I have liked to have met them? Of course. That would have been a great honor for me to have somebody introduce their children into my life, but not then. It was something that it was like, okay, well, let's see where we're at in 6 months. Let's see where we're at in a year. And if we're still doing this and you and me are still, happy with where we're at, and you think that this is something that is going to be long-term and is worth bringing your children into the picture, then yes, I would love to meet them. But it's like, not right now. You are still in this situation where you're not even completely out of it, and I'm getting in it, and that's not fair for them.
Do you recall where the house was?
Yeah, it's like right off the highway in Frederick.
Okay. And you know the streets?
I mean, I'm sure I could figure it out again if I really had to. Off the top of my head, no.
Do you know the street name?
No.
Okay.
I would have to drive around in there to get there. Yes, I went to the house, and the first time I was there, I hung out in their like front living room. I just sat on the floor, and it was on the 4th of July. It was the morning of the 4th, and I was helping him to set up MyFitnessPal app and like track his food, his calories and stuff, because he does pretty good with the working out and stuff. And he asked me, he's like, "Can you help me just like get this dialed in?" I was like, "Yeah, I can do that." So that he invited me up to the house, and I was already kind of hesitant to do it because I was like, there are other people that live here, and I just felt like it was an invasion of space. And so I went up there, and we just stayed in that front room, and I helped him out with that, and got him all set up with that. And then, he asked me if I wanted lunch, and he grilled chicken and carrots. And then that's all he had. And I was like, okay, so we ate, and then I left. I'm so hungry. Murder is on something on the top of my mind when I call one of my friends for 3 or 4 hours and she doesn't answer the phone. Like, that doesn't even process to me as like a real thing that is a possibility at that point. It's a small talk of like, hey, this, you know. I think that you should take the time to read some articles about what separation does to kids. You know, and I told him, I said, when my parents separated, we were literally like 3 and 5. We were almost the exact same age as these little girls. And I told him, I said, you know, I was so young when it happened that it didn't really have like a big negative effect on me because I was so small that I didn't really process it too well. I was like, but I do have cousins that their parents got divorced when they were like 10, 11, and I think that it hit them a little harder. You know, it's just not it's a good spot, but just not for the TVs. So he's been trying to like eat a little healthier than he normally does, and he's always like been in the working out since I knew him, and he like tries to eat clean, but he was trying to like step it up a little bit, and nothing like the people who do like the competitions and the shows that are all super restrictive. It was nothing like that. It's just like day-to-day general maintenance, but it's how I eat, and it's pretty healthy. And he's been losing a lot of weight. He lost, I want to say like 13 pounds in the time that we were hanging out. And honestly, when you start eating a little bit cleaner and you start working out a little bit harder, the first couple months, especially for a man, because they lose weight faster, it's not something that's like that drastic to me, but it did stand out that it was like a little much. And so I was like, whoa, like maybe you're not eating enough macronutrients, so let me look at them. So he had been working on his MyFitnessPal app and like programming like all the stuff he eats, and I just started going through them, and I was like trying to figure out like where his ratios were, and we actually spent a lot of time doing that because he'd asked me to do it for him, because I just was at the point where I was like, if his weight loss slows down in a few weeks, he'll be fine, and if it doesn't, then his macros are a little off. It's not like that big of a deal. Like in the workout community, this is like a very normal thing. I mean, when I first started working out, I dropped like 12 pounds in 2 weeks when I first started like hitting it hard with the diet, how interknitted I am with the like workout community.
She can remember very small, minor details that would be so insignificant in the grand scheme of things. However, she can't remember what was discussed during that 111-minute phone call.
Of this whole
Let's get to the phone call on Saturday from 9 to 11. What did you guys, or pardon me, on Sunday from 9 to 11?
Yeah, we talked a few times. So, Sunday,
Okay.
I think so. I need to think. I can't even think.
Take a couple breaths and take a second.
Sunday night. I don't even know. I don't think I was like concerned about anything at that point.
You guys had had a nice meal the night before. You knew his wife was probably coming home late that evening.
Oh, you know what? I still don't remember what we talked about. I like, honestly, like we talk about so much random stuff. Like it's so hard to pinpoint some of these things. I don't remember what we talked about. I do remember that was a long phone conversation though. We probably talked about all sorts of stuff. One thing I do remember though that I didn't remember earlier when I was talking to Mark. So this is like where I'm starting to remember like little bits and pieces.
And
I
that
don't
gives you
remember. Yeah, I know. So the phone conversation. I don't remember what was in the phone conversation. Probably nothing of relevance, to be honest with you. But usually he talks to me when he's like down in the basement in his bed before he goes to bed and before I go to bed. And I could hear the TV on, which I thought was kind of weird. I didn't ask him. I just heard it in the background. And I remember thinking, and it was like right before we got off the phone, I was like, why the hell is he up? And there's like no TV downstairs. So I was like, well, maybe, I don't know.
So no TV in the basement where he usually calls you from.
Yeah, and I don't know how many TVs they have. Like, I've never been in their bedroom. Like, I went upstairs once and it was like to their little playroom and I just like looked at it and I was like, that's super cute that your girls have books. And that was like it. And other than that, I have never been in any of those rooms in that upstairs. Like, to me, it was just like, you don't know, like, ever. I had no, so I don't know if he has any other TVs. I'm assuming by, like, how much other nice stuff they have in their house, it wouldn't surprise me. So I'm not quite sure what room he was in at that point. But I just remember hearing the TV, and I was like, it was just weird to me. Because I was like, why are you watching TV right now? It is, like, super late. And that was the only thing.
And he had phoned you, or were you guys already talking when the TV was going, or?
I just remember I picked up on it like later, but I don't think it was like throughout the whole conversation.
Okay.
Like, I just remember it being towards the end because I remember thinking like, wow, it's really late.
That's a fairly long phone call to not be able to remember any of the details of. And unfortunately, Chris seems to not really be aware of what they were discussing at that time either, because he certainly hasn't shed any proper light on it. Now, some have surmised that this conversation was Chris and Nichol just getting a bit hot and heavy, and nobody wants to discuss it because, well, it's a bit embarrassing to talk to people about that. Of course, you could simply just say that that was the situation without going into all of the gory details of who said what. We don't need all those facts. But she could have simply said it was an intimate conversation that turned sexual, and she feels very embarrassed by it. She doesn't. Instead, she flounders, she flips around, and, they just talked about everything, and they always just talked about everything, and there's just so much she just can't recall it because they talked so often. We're gonna look at a few different theories. There's the idea that this phone call was Nichol and Chris planning taking the lives of Shanann, Bella, Celeste, and Nico. That they were fine-tuning things, working out who was going to be where, when, who was going to do what, discussing the disposal, and potentially that could be a possibility. It's something that could have happened. None of us know because we weren't there. There's other theories that Chris at this point was potentially having some kind of breakdown. He knew that he was going to be murdering his family and he was freaking out, and he'd just absolutely lost the plot, and he'd contacted Nichol, and she ended up needing to be the one talking him off a ledge for a change. One of the most plausible explanations is that they were potentially having a very difficult conversation about their relationship and where it was going to go. Nichol knew that Shanann and the girls were coming home. She had had Chris at her beck and call all those weeks that Shanann was in North Carolina. And in that time, despite what Chris says in later interviews about Nichol suddenly realising that she was never going to come first, Shanann was always going to come first. That's bunkum. Shanann didn't come first to Chris, because if she did, he wouldn't have ignored her in favour of Nichol. But that's exactly what he was doing. He was available for Nichol whenever, wherever. When Shanann needed him, he was nowhere to be seen, usually because he was too busy on the phone with Nichol. All this was potentially going to stop as soon as Shanann returned. Chris would have to man up and have a serious conversation with Shanann and let her know that it was 100% over, he wanted a divorce, and he should be looking at moving out of that house pretty quickly. That was never going to be a nice situation, regardless of how Shanann genuinely felt about things. And we will be looking at that in another episode as well. But it was never going to happen because these things aren't just done in a morning or a day or even a week. He had obligations to his children. He still had obligations to Shanann, to the household. He couldn't just walk away and give Nichol all of that time that she'd been so used to. It's quite possible that during that phone call, she told him he needed to make a decision, that it was either her or Shanann. She passed reference to talking to Chris about apartments again and how he hadn't sounded as interested as he previously had when they'd been having these conversations. Maybe Chris said to Nichol on the phone, the apartment thing, it's gonna have to be put on hold because I have to sort things out with Shanann first. I have to have this conversation and we have to have a plan. I can't just waltz out midweek and start looking at apartments for myself without actually discussing the marriage and what's happened to it with my wife. You could imagine Nichol at that point pitching an absolute fit because she just wants everything done with. She just wants Chris at this point to be free of Shanann, and he's not going to be, and none of it's going to be easy. The ultimatum that Nichol potentially could have given Chris could have been horrendous. We have Chris saying that he has had to talk Nichol off a ledge because she'd just go off on one over the simplest of things. And that's quite funny that we hear that from him. We don't hear him saying that about Shanann, yet that's what a lot of other people say about Shanann. And again, that's something for a later video. He said there were rumours. I think his dad had told him that after the murders, Nichol had been taking videos of herself, talking to herself, and she was bipolar or something. Well, we don't know that. We don't have any evidence. We're not privy to her medical records. We don't really know anything about mental health at all. And to speculate on mental health can sometimes walk a bit of a fine line that we don't really want to cross. I'm not qualified to diagnose any mental health issues at all. I have worked in mental health and I've worked with criminals, and there are definitely traits in Nichol of various personality issues. However, I can't say they're symptoms because I'm not qualified to do so. But if she was very highly strung and prone to just blowing off and being a bit of a drama, you can imagine her chewing Chris's ear off. And because he is Chris, he's just going to sit there and listen to it and try and figure out what the best thing to do is to appease the person that's having a go at him at that point in time. Because Chris does seem to change a little bit based on who he's dealing with and what he thinks they want from him, rather than just being his authentic self, if Chris does indeed have an authentic self. Nichol says in interview she never said anything to Chris along the lines of, it would be so much better if you didn't have a wife, if you didn't have children. She says she never said that, but we'll never know the truth. Because when you're the other woman, when the man you're having an affair with has a beautiful wife who's returning home and he's going to get in the way of you being top dog, a lot of women would say things either meant or in the heat of the moment that afterwards they may well regret. There is a potential that she said she wished that his wife and children were dead. We've heard mistresses say this before. It would be so much easier if they died. Then you wouldn't have the divorce. Then you wouldn't have the child support. Then I wouldn't be in this situation. It's a very selfish way of thinking. And we have to remember, we're talking about mistresses who, by their very nature, can be very self-absorbed. I'm not talking about the likes of Amber Frey and people that get into relationships with men that genuinely don't know that they're married. But there really is zero chance, looking at all the evidence, listening to the interviews, that Nichol thought Chris was already separated. That night, she could have pushed and pushed and pushed Chris. And we all know the situation. We've got the lazy dog. We've got that credit card charge. We've already had Shanann on the phone to him, telling him in response to whatever lie he's told her, to keep the receipt so that they can write the expense off. He's ignored Shanann now for the longest time, and she has been at him, trying to find out what's wrong, trying to tell him how she feels. She goes from being upset with him to being angry with him, and then back to being upset again, which is normal when you are being gaslit to the extent that she had been. And he knows that all of this is going to somehow blow up in his face. Shanann is going to ask him questions. She's going to ask about the lazy dog and that charge. She's going to ask him if he's got someone else, because his behaviour towards her looks like he does. It's the only rational thing that explains it. She's probably going to lose her temper again about his parents and Nutgate, because at this point everything has built up so much in Shanann. She's suffering with her mental health too, and you can see in the messages she is of such a low mood. She is so stressed. She is so tired mentally and physically. He was absolutely crushing her day by day in favour of Nichol. Is there a chance that Chris thought to himself that night of the phone call that he should maybe do the right thing and take a break from Nichol? Did Chris maybe say to Nichol, this has to stop. Let me sort this out with Shanann. There's a baby involved. We can come back together when all this is done and dusted and everything has settled down and everybody is okay. Did Nichol flip out on him because he suggested that? You never know. It could have happened. It seems highly unlikely because we don't have much evidence that Chris was interested in the slightest bit in baby Nico. He certainly wasn't in the slightest bit interested in Shanann, and he seemed to not give a flying fig about how she was feeling. If anybody was threatening to call things off, my bet, just based on the evidence, would be it was Nichol. So Chris then feels he's losing his wife, he's losing his children, and now he's going to lose Nichol. And then what happens? Does he start planning to take the lives of his family then? We have Chris saying in both his prison interview and in his letters to Cheryl and Cadle that this is something that he'd been thinking about. In one instance, he says he's been thinking about it for weeks. Whatever the phone conversation was, it doesn't sound, based on the evidence, that it was a catalyst for the deaths. The evidence that we have comes from Chris himself in his confession. We all know that Chris is pretty shocking at lying, but it's something that he chooses to do a lot of. However, he doesn't mention that this phone call was a snapping point. Neither of them are talking about this telephone call. Nobody was there to verify exactly what was said between them. But the evidence we have from his confession doesn't appear that this was a man who just snapped. He took himself off to bed after the telephone conversation. You know, he was in bed when Shanann came home, if we go by the official narrative. And yes, while the conversation with Nichol could have been her potentially giving him an ultimatum, there is just no evidence of that, and there never will be. Nobody knows what was said in that telephone call. And when we're looking at this, we are sticking to the facts that we can get our hands on. And those facts are in the discovery and in interviews. Some of these things that we've been discussing are things that people have been coming up with about Nichol for a long time. And there's lots of little discrepancies that we can all speculate over. And even in some of this, trying to find alternative explanations for Nichol's behaviour, even that is actually speculation, because I don't know what she was thinking. What we do need to remember in this, though, is that while we can speculate over Nichol if we want to, we can't take away from the fact that Chris admitted to taking the lives of his family. It's okay to consider whether Nichol was morally wrong and morally guilty due to the affair that she was having. It's another thing entirely to say that she must have been there. Chris couldn't have done it alone. Because some of the problem with that, as much as it's well-meaning, it does take some of the blame away from Chris. And it does try to apportion that blame elsewhere. Even the most well-meaning of people have said, you know, Chris is an absolute monster. He did this, he's responsible, he's exactly where he needs to be. But he couldn't have done it all alone. He couldn't have moved all of those bodies. The speculation in this case walks a very fine line between being speculation and looking at things that do take the blame away from the perpetrator. In this case, Chris. And as I've already said, everybody's entitled to their own opinions, and opinions are fine, speculation's fine, so long as we're all clear on the fact that Chris has admitted guilt. The things that we've looked at so far don't point to involvement from any other direction, but there is more to go into with Nichol Kessinger. People are very passionate about this particular aspect of the case, and while I'm covering it, and I will continue to cover it, I do just want to put it out there that this person, Nichol Kessinger, she shouldn't be allowed to become bigger than the victims of this senseless tragedy. I'd love to know where you all stand on the Nichol Kessinger story. As I said, there is more to come in the next video, and we've only covered a small bit of some of the things that people think in support of her and against her. I will just note again that these aren't my opinions. I'm literally playing devil's advocate in these videos and looking at everybody's take on it, whether that could be Chris's potential take or his family's take or the Ruzek's take or the take of you people out there on the internet. It's important to try and see it from all sides. We just have to remember that everybody is considered innocent until proven guilty in a court of law. In the next video, we need to have a little look at phone pings and bring up some maps. We need to look at some video surveillance footage. We need to discuss phone records. And we have to dip our toes into magic, witches, cults, and warlocks and see where these theories have come from, how they've taken hold, and how that can be a problem for the case. Thank you to those of you that have got this far. Thank you to those of you who have subscribed. You all mean the absolute world to me. All your opinions are valid, and I really am so grateful that for the most part you've all remained respectful to the victims, in this case, in the comment section. I also really thank you for being respectful to each other, and it's good to be able to have these kinds of discussions and look at everything objectively from everyone's point of view. To those that are new, I hope you consider subscribing. For those who've just dipped in and then dived out again, thank you still for being here. I appreciate your time. I'll see you all in the next video, but for the time being, stay curious, stay kind, and take care of yourselves. I've been Fiona, and this has been Case Continued.